battled Barbara Boxer toe-to-toe on the issue of partial birth abortion. And we lost in 1996. We lost again in 1998. We lost again in the Supreme Court after that. Year after year, we kept losing, but I kept fighting. And through those losses, what happened? Had Bill Clinton signed that bill when it first came out of the Senate, no one in this room would have ever heard of a partial birth abortion. But because he didn't, I had to go to the Senate floor on hour after hour after hour and stand up to debate, as it turned out, Boxer and Feinstein and Clinton and the rest, Harkin, who all were on the other side of that issue. And the media just beat me up. I went from being a conservative to being an ultra-conservative. As I said last night, my children actually thought for a while my first name was Ultra. And that's what happens. That's what the media does to you. They bully you. They bully you. People say, what's an ultra-conservative? It's a pro-life, pro-family spokesperson. Not a voter. I voted pro-life, pro-family for 5 years before I ever uttered the word abortion. I look back, and they did it to me. They cowered me into the corner because I knew I would pay a price if I stuck my head out. And when I did, they hammered. And they hammered hard. And they still do. I was on the Today Show. Matt Lauer this morning. YouTube it. You're a social conservative. I led on welfare reform. I've led on agriculture policy. I wrote the milk title in the ag bill, believe it or not. I've led on pension reforms. I've led on tax reform. I've led on national security. I was on the Armed Services Committee and transitioned our Cold War force into a force that would be lethal and lighter to meet the asymmetric threats before 9/11. But not according to Matt Lauer. No. You're just this ultra-conservative. Why? Because nobody else talks about it. And if you do, there must be something wrong with you. You must be someone who has really weird, strong opinions. Your chairman said, if you have the courage to stand up on those issues, it's pretty obvious you have the courage to stand up on issues where they don't beat you up very often. If you can stand up as I did and fought for the marriage amendment, as I did, I helped draft that amendment. And I thought of the folks in the media and in the culture were tough on people who were pro-life. I learned a lesson. That's only the beginning. If you stand up against the left and defend traditional marriage, if you have the temerity to stand up and say that we should not be affirming alternative lifestyles by giving them the right to, quote, marry, or the privilege, I should say, not the right, the privilege to be recognized in marriage, that's when they really lower the boat. I had an opportunity to talk about a case, Lawrence versus Texas. And the media is going to be amazed. Oh, he's talking about his faux pas and talking about Lawrence versus Texas. You say, what's Lawrence versus Texas? It was a court decision. Had to do with the Texas sodomy statute. And those of us who were watching this, who cared about marriage, who cared about family, we saw this court decision as a potential game changer for our country and the survival of the family. This was a case where the court was going to decide whether the state of Texas had the right to criminalize sodomy. And I made a comment to a reporter that I said, if the court changes their decision from literally just not even 15 years before, in 1986, and changes their decision and says that there's a constitutional right to consensual sexual activity, a constitutional right, I said, then what is stopping the court from saying there's a constitutional right to incest or bigamy or polygamy or any other type of sexual activity that's consensual? When that came out, AP ran it. People said, how dare you compare homosexuality to bestiality or incest or anything else? I said, I didn't compare it. I said, if the court says you have a constitutional right, then there's no standard by which they can deny the constitutional right to other types of activity. Well, it was a firestorm. They said, oh, you're a bigot, you're a hater. And they went out. In fact, members of my party called for me to resign because of my hate-filled speech. Members of my party called for me to resign. The President of the United States was asked repeatedly, what do you think about this? His spokespeople were, and they remained silent for 3 days as the media firestorm erupted that I would dare to say such horrific things about people. I didn't change my opinion. I stood by what I said. It turned out that Justice Scalia, in his dissent, and by the way, they did find a constitutional right to consensual sexual activity. Justice Scalia wrote in the dissent, if you have the right to consensual sexual activity of a homosexual kind, there is no limit other than fiat. In other words, just because they say it so, but there's no limit, reasoning-wise, for the court to say that you don't have the right, and listed the same things I did. Why? Because it's true. The court doesn't have a leg to stand on to limit those things. Now, did the press report, hey, by the way, what Santorum said, that's what 4 members of the judiciary said on that 5-4 decision. No, they didn't say that. They said I was a homophobe, bigot, etc. And went out and made me the #1 target in the 2006 election. It's a guy by the name of Tim Gill. Tim Gill is a guy from Colorado, and he's an activist. He gave a homosexual activist. He gave an interview. He's a billionaire. He funds all sorts of groups, including groups that elect Secretary of States all over the country, to make sure that if there are close elections, guess who wins? As you know, from north of here. They have plans to take out state legislators and county commissioners and everything else. It's called the Colorado Plan. He said in an interview with Atlantic Monthly in 2006, the year I was running, he said, we're going to make sure there is never another Rick Santorum ever elected to higher office. So you want to know whether I have the courage to stand up and fight against Obamacare? You think I have the courage to stand up and fight against increasing taxes, cutting spending? When George Bush called in 2004 to go out and take on Social Security, who ran out to the Senate floor to debate the Democrats on it when no one else would? Me and Jim DeMint. My wife always says, Rick, I don't worry about your courage. Wisdom and discernment, on the other hand. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a time in America where we need people of vision and courage. We need people who see America the way our founders saw America and created the greatest country in the history of the world. They created the greatest country in the history of the world because for the first time in the history of the world, they recognized something true. And they wrote it in the Declaration of Independence. We are endowed by our Creator. We are endowed by our Creator with rights, inalienable rights. That sort of chips off everybody's tongue. School kids learn it all the time, and people just sort of take it for granted. But it was revolutionary when they wrote it. They said for the first time that rights come to each and every one of us, that we are all children of God, and God gives us rights that no man, no government can take away. It was revolutionary because where they came from in Europe, they didn't believe that. They believed that rights came to the king, to the sovereign, and the sovereign spread the wealth around.